will give a very short introduction why we are interested in this topic here in Linz, and I excuse myself, I put it from a personal point of view. You all know that we are professors here at the Interface Cultures Department and also practicing artists. And as Gerfried, I think, has already mentioned, many artists such as us are now thinking about the collaboration or possibilities and opportunities and new challenges, of course, of artists coming from a media art background, entering or dealing with the media art market. So I'm speaking also on behalf of Laurent Mignonneau. So the structure of my talk, and I have to actually limit my time myself, so I have to be strict to myself. I have to finish in 20 minutes. I will tell you a little bit about interface cultures, what it is, then give you just a few examples and explain you why we are interested in the value of art and the art market. I think the new students, especially here, I see many of you, I would also like you to fill in an attendance list, because I know that you have to write a report. So maybe, Laurent, if you can put this list. So we check that you are really here. So Laurent Mignonneau and me have been producing interactive art since 1991. And in 2004, we got this great opportunity by Reinhard Kanonier, who called us from Japan to come here to Linz to found the Interface Cultures Department, which is a master study program. And our objectives are interactive art and interface technologies, research on the cultural aspects of interface design and interaction design, also teach technical expertise, but also conceptual information about the field of interactivity, and on the one hand combine theoretical as well as practical prototype development. And of course, being in Linz, it's a fantastic chance for us that we can use somehow the context of Linz with the Ars Electronica context and have our students show their works every year at the Ars Electronica Festival. And I think many of our students actually come to Linz also to study with us because of this fantastic collaboration with the Ars Electronica. So again, thank you, Gerfried, for promoting our student works here every year. What's my specialty and my big interest is interactive art and participatory art. Here we can also say quite proudly that Linz has a really important role to play, especially since 1990. The Ars Electronica Festival had this as a special category. But if we are completely honest, it didn't start only in 1990. Interactive art started much earlier. For example, already we can find traces in participatory art from the 20s and 50s onwards. There are many examples of kinetic and reactive kinetic art since the 50s or even 20s, kinetic art. Then very important developments in art and technology from the 60s. Then pioneers of computer art. I think here we have a big specialist here, Christiane Paul and Wolf Lieser. Cybernetic art, we just had Jascha Reinhardt win the big Golden Nika Award for her lifetime achievement, closed circuit installation, expanded cinema, and finally the pioneers of electronic art. So there is actually a huge history, I mean huge in terms of maybe our time scale, but at least we could say almost 100 years of history of artists dealing with ideas of participation and some form of interaction. Umberto Eco and many other theorists such as Roland Barthes or even Bert Brecht have been dealing about this idea of the open artwork, which basically means that you leave some arrangements of the artwork to the audience or even to chance. We don't really have time to go into it, and this is part of my course here, but we can find traces of interaction and participation of the audience in Dadaism, in Gutta, in Happenings, in Fluxus, in conceptual art, in Tropicalia, and many other art movements. So this idea, what Gerfried talked about, this open artwork, or the artwork that is constant development, is not only a specificum of media art, it's actually something that other art movements had to deal with as well, or performance art. Just one example of participation art, Alison Knowles here, who had this events course, where she gave written instructions to the audience of how to make a salad, or to make a salad actually, and then this was acted out by the audience, and each time somebody made a salad, it kind of became a work of participation art. Or here in the luminokinetic art example, very beautiful example of Julio Lepac from the 60s, a kind of space that was dealing with moving lights and images, where the people or the audience could engulf themselves or go into this space and really immerse themselves inside this space where lights and mirrors were moving, and kind of movement, the movement was very important. Or here another example of art and experiments in technology, Robert Rauschenberg, a performance where two players, tennis players, were equipped with rackets they played tennis, and then with these rackets they could control the lights and the sounds in the space. So again, a form of performance and also audience participation to some degree. Pioneers of computer art, I think Wolf Lieser maybe will tell us a bit more about them, are now finally starting to be rediscovered. Especially people like Frieda Nake and also Nees and Noll and many others, Vera Molnar and many others, are now slowly entering the art market. Their works are starting to become more appreciated, and I think we really owe a lot of inspiration to them as well, because they talked about the aesthetic of computers, information aesthetic à la Benze, and also really brought up a completely new field. Maybe not so much interaction, but this idea of computer graphics and computer aesthetics. Then even in cybernetic art, if you look at the whole teach, for example, cybernetic art to the students, there are also many artifacts that have been lost, unfortunately. I don't know, for example, where the colloquy of mobiles by Gordon Pask is, if it still exists, but many such kind of artifacts of pioneering artists, engineers from this time, from the 60s, have been doing really important work for us now as practicing media artists and as scholars, but their works are probably not really preserved. On the other hand, we can have some example of artists who made it into the art market, like Nam June Paik. His work, I think, is a good example of closed circuit installation, but also expanded cinema and early electronic art. Here we have examples of artists that really managed to somehow preserve their works through distributing it in the art market, and many of these pieces, or not all, but many of these pieces are still in museum collections. Here one example of Nam June Paik's closed circuit installation, and there are of course many others such as Participation TV and Magnet TV and so forth. One of my favorite artists is of course my teacher, Peter Weibel, who is a good example also of artists who worked with expanded cinema, such as Wally Expert of course as well, where artists explored also the idea of alternative cinema and used film and projection screens, and even sometimes projected on their own bodies. So really experimented with equipment that was completely new at that time, and also brought up new concept of audience participation. Then, as I mentioned, interactive art is really important here at the Ars Electronica Festival. It's a category that exists since 1990s. And of course, it was also, is still very occupied with this idea of viewer involvement, electronically supported interactivity. There are many other people we should mention, of course, and we don't have the time here, such as Frank Popper, Edmond Couchot, Norman White, Jean-Louis Basvier, Hervé Fischer, and so forth, who not only dealt with interactivity or media art from a kind of technological point of view, but also with this whole conceptual and philosophical aspects that are related to these topics. Here I took a very, I'm not sure, Paul, if you will show this later, this slide. I really like to show this slide to the students. It's a very nice, and maybe it's interesting to you, Gerfried, as well. It's from Paul Welder's recent PhD dissertation, where he shows how the categories at the pre-Ars Electronica have changed over the time, and which categories survived the longest. And to my total surprise, interactive art has actually a very big continuation, while other categories such as net art or digital communities, hybrid art and so forth have had more interruptions. So I think that would be quite interesting to see that interactive art is actually a category that seems to be quite popular and a lot of submissions. Even, I think, Paul, you said that the submission rate in interactive art was also higher than in some other categories, but maybe you can explain us this in detail later. So anyway, what we can take from this is that interactive art is something that's quite popular. We have, of course, the books by Christiane Poll, who has also out on the book stand some examples, books by Eddie Schanken, Söke Dinkler, Richard Kluschinski, or Katja Kwastek, who was a scholar here as well, dealing with this idea of the aesthetic of interaction and also the philosophical background. So I wrapped here some very short conclusion or some short overview of interactivity and this idea of participation. And what for us, and teaching this now for a few years already, what always strikes me is that even though all these artworks are really important and we find them in the books and we reference them and they have influenced us, we see that many of these artworks are not here anymore. We don't know where they are, they're probably lost. We have to rely on images and descriptions. And this, I think, from an artist point of view, is of course a sad thing. I would like to now show you just a few examples of our own art practice and also show you which works sort of made it into the art market, or at least into the museums. So as I mentioned, Laurent and me are active since '92. We practice, we combine artistic practice and scientific research. We are quite interested in this open-ended recombinatory art and also this concept of the open artwork, an artwork that is never fixed and is always changing depending on the user interaction. This was the first work we did in '92 and later actually got it into the ZKM Media Art Museum, which is a very nice thing for us because now this work survives and people really take care of it. So for those who don't know, you touch plants and then artificial plants grow on the screen. So it's a kind of, almost became a classic of interactive art. Then this is a work that doesn't 100% exist anymore, but Laurent told me he will reactivate it. It was a commission for Cartier Foundation where people could write on a website some text. And then this text was transformed in little forms that would grow into a collective growing image. And here, the issue of porting it to the latest system, I think, is always something that we could really discuss about, but it was a commission, later was not maybe followed up in reactivating it. Then this was a work that was actually distributed by Wolf Lieser Gallery, Dam Gallery, to a collector in Korea. That's right. So this was our first attempt to make a work that is actually easier to handle for a private person. It was a screen where you could walk in front and then forms would grow on the screen. So in a way this worked in combination with the art market. This work was the Golden Nika Award that we got in 1994 here at Ars Electronica. This, I think, is a work that's very complicated to collect or to really put into a private collection. This would be more a work that goes into a museum. So far, we have showed it and also commissioned it for science museums. So this is in a few collections of science museums in Spain mostly, but I think too complicated maybe and too unstable for a private collection. This work here, for example, is a typewriter where you can write text and the text is being displayed as little creatures on a piece of paper. Here we got a really nice commission by the Itaú Cultural Collection in Brazil, who have really, a bit like Ars Electronica, a very nice expertise of engineers and people who really very much know about media art preservation. And they have been showing it all over Brazil in many, many exhibitions. And the work has been, I think, up for almost 5 years or even longer. I think it was acquired in 2006. So almost 10 years now it's being distributed and shown. Without that, we actually have to deal with it. The museums and this collection takes care of it. So that's a fantastic thing for us. Here, this was a commission for Hermes, the famous luxury brand in France. Laurent developed a system where people can write some text and then, or make some drawings, and then these drawings are transformed in little creatures that sort of pass around on the piece of paper. I have to admit this is a relatively complicated setup, and this can probably only be handled by a larger collection such as Hermes, and I'm not sure about the stability of the project, of how they can handle this maybe in the long term. And it was also actually not purely an artwork, but more a piece that was commissioned for a launch of this luxury pen. And then Hermes wanted to have an artist. They often work with artists to actually combine their products with artistic projects, which for us was a new experience, but quite interesting and challenging. Then Portrait on the Fly, which you can see later in the Ars Electronica Center, was actually a project where we proactively dealt with this issue of impermanence and conservation in media art. We started to become quite critical about our own art practice, in a way also mourning somehow the fact that many of these art pieces, not just us, but also from our colleagues and from previous art generations, are gone. So we thought, okay, let's deal with art conservation from a very practical and proactive and very personal point of view, and dealing with this ephemeral aspect of media art. So we came up with this idea of Portrait on the Fly, which exists in 3 different versions, as an interactive version, as plotter drawings, and as a video archive. The fly, I think, is a very interesting symbol, because in many cultures, fly is associated with death and decay, and even in forensic entomology, the fly is, or the larvae of the fly are used to determine the exact time of death. So if you're watching, what are the famous series on television, you know, if there's some kind of criminal case and they are looking at when the person died, they can always know exactly this person died 5 hours ago, and the fact how you find out is basically that the larvae have a very programmed development state, the larvae of the flies. When they infest a corpse or a body, then you can determine exactly the time of death. So of course this may be a bit morbid, but for us the fly is also a symbol for the decay of media art, and maybe also the fragility of media art per se. We also are quite interested in these conservation strategies, media art conservation strategies, and I think many of you know Dr. Oliver Grau, who, like I think also we talked before, complains or points out that many key media artworks are now disappearing, are being lost, and a lot of cultural heritage is in danger because it's not being collected and not preserved. So media artists, as we know, have been doing great artworks for a long time, but many of these artifacts are gone. So it's not only an issue for us, I think, to deal with the art market as making money for artists, but it's also about preservation and making sure that these artworks are being put out there and are being distributed and being kept alive. So what we came up with is this system. It's quite simple. It's a screen. You walk in front of it, and as you move in front of the screen, your outlines are being transformed by little flies, and you start to see yourself in the form of little flies. So I'll just show you a very short sequence here. The flies are programmed in such a way that they sit wherever there is no movement, and as soon as they stick to an area with no movement, you start to see yourself, or you start to appear. But as soon as you move, all these flies go away. So this idea of an image that just appears there in this very tiny moment was for us an interesting symbol of dealing with this idea of, the fly as a symbol of life and death. I move a bit faster. Okay. So I said that we are also interested in dealing with things that can be kept, and Wolf Lieser invited us to his gallery for an interesting exhibition where we reenacted some aesthetic of old plotter drawings, as was done by people such as Frida Nake and others, and made their portraits into fly portraits. Here you see Peter Weiber and others. Here are some shots from the Ars Electronica Center. And there's also a version where we are combining or converting people, well-known media art experts' portraits into fly portraits and make them part of a big video collection of portraits of those people. That is an ongoing conservation project that we are doing personally. But let me move now to a topic that I want just to break up so that we discuss later. It's the issue of attention economy and art market. And one of the issues that is interesting for art is not, for us, is this idea between the attention and money in art and the art market. As you know, that we now live in an attention economy where people's attention is sometimes even more valuable than money, because in Facebook or on Twitter and so on, we're all looking for the likes, or we're all looking for the attention of other people. So attention of the audience is becoming actually an asset. And this can be actually used for art making as well, or in the art market. I think this attention of the audience can be an interesting asset as well. And probably if you all have seen the skull by Damien Hirst, placed with a lot of diamonds, you ask yourself, or many people ask themselves, why are these works so expensive? Or even why is a Monet so expensive? Or even why are all these kind of famous artists, why are their artworks so expensive? And often it's not understandable, and we think it's just a matter of a certain hype. On the other hand, we know that there's historical circumstances, the biography of the artists, the effort that collectors, galleries, auctions, and museums put into promoting these works and distributing these works has led to this certain monetary value. Actually, Michael Finlay and Jacqueline Nowikovsky write about that art has also this socio-economical function, and they show there is a strong connection between the primary and the secondary market, and also the influence of the experts, critics, curators, and organizers, such as, for example, museums, such as here, the LENTOS Museum. So, coming from a background with all these different concepts, we turned it into a very simplistic piece of art and bought a painting at an auction house in Vienna and equipped this painting with a sensor that can measure how long people look at the painting. And every 10 seconds of people's attention adds a value of €1 to the artwork. And it's actually very simple. At the beginning, the artwork has exactly the value that you can calculate, such as how much money we paid for the painting, how much money we spent for the equipment to install the sensors, how much our working time we evaluate our working time, and then each time somebody looks at the painting, this artwork value goes up. So a very direct and, of course, I'm sure not legitimate way of measuring people's value, but really putting the value of the audience into the artwork in a very super transparent and almost kind of scientific way. So what you see on this slip later is how people's attention is being transformed in value and how the value of the artwork goes constantly up. And as a special sort of reference to Austrian artist, media artist, or famous artist Arnulf Rainer, we bought Arnulf Rainer serigraphy for, let me see, it was quite expensive. We spent €1,300, which is a huge amount of money, on this Arnulf Rainer. We bought a frame for 310, we bought some material, 380, we had some expenses for our travels and for our lunch. So the original value was €2,400, and then we showed it a lot, and now the value of the artwork is €7,058.30. So you can see this system helps you to increase the value of your artwork significantly, depending on the attention of people. So I would like to stop here and put up a few questions and challenges and opportunities. As we have seen, or what I tried to show briefly, is that media art and interactive art often celebrates user involvement and participation. As also Gerfried mentioned, the artwork is never finished or fixed, it's in constant flux. But because of this problem of the artwork that is never finished, it is also very hard to preserve and to collect. And also the short lifespan of the artwork, which is the materiality itself, can also pose a problem. So if we want media art, in particular interactive art, to survive longer, I think we as artists have to really become more proactive in coming up with interesting and challenging and perhaps also clever and funny solutions of how to make these artworks deal with issues of impermanence. And I think the art market for us as artists is important and interesting, not only because we want to make money, I think that's of course also nice, but also to really spread these works into a wider community of collectors who can take care of these works later on as well. And I'm very happy that we have many experts here who will tell us probably examples of how this can be done, or maybe also tell us about the challenges and the problems that we have to encounter. But I think we agree now, and that's what the overall consensus, I think, is so far, that we really need to deal with these issues very soon. So I would like to thank you all for being here, and again also thank to the Ars Electronica, the Kunstuniversität, and to the Hochschulraum Strukturmittelförderungsgrant by the Austrian Federal Ministry of Science, Research and Economy, who helps us to be here. And I would also like to really dedicate this symposium to Karin Bruns, who is, or was, unfortunately she died last Friday, was the head of our Department of Media, and so in memoriam Karin Bruns. So our next speaker will be Steve Fletcher, and Steve, may I please ask you to come up to the stage?